So, I want to begin today by asking all of you, when you think of Thailand, what comes to your mind? For many of you, Thailand may be known as a land of smile because of how friendly our people are. But what you may not know is that behind those smiles, the Thai people are becoming increasingly frustrated at how little our country has changed. Admittedly, I am one of those people, and that is exactly why I decided to enter politics. Looking back, what I realized is that the Thailand that I left to go and study abroad at the age of 13 is barely any different from the Thailand I returned to and have been trying each day to change since I entered parliament at the age of 30. Our schools and national curriculum are still outdated. Our economy is still crippled by corruption. Our laws still force us to censor ourselves on certain topics. And our government is still run by the same families and the same networks. And even after 93 years since our supposed transition to a democracy, I'm afraid to say our democracy is still in transition and still interrupted by a series of military coups. In fact, almost exactly 11 years ago today, General Prayut Chan-o-cha staged a military coup to take power away from the people, eventually installing a military-drafted constitution that is still in force today and has expanded the powers of unelected institutions at the expense of elected representatives. He initially tried to justify that his crime against democracy was necessary in order to bring stability and to end corruption. But when time passed and the COVID crisis came in 2020, it became clear, even to his previous supporters, that his undemocratic regime had only made our economy and our society worse off than before. This then became a very important stimulus for many of our young people to take to the streets and demand a democratic system where power truly belongs to the people. Young students were rising up against authoritarian rules and practices in schools. Young activists were calling out for some of the most expansive reforms of our free speech laws and political institutions. And young workers were standing up to a government that they felt was misusing their hard-earned tax money. However, these young people were rewarded with water guns and criminal lawsuits. I also found myself summoned by the police for allegedly violating the country's emergency decree simply for speaking at one of their activities. And even though the movement on the streets eventually faded, the sentiment for change amongst the Thai people only strengthened. 2 years ago, I was one of many young people who decided to quit our full-time job to run as candidates in the general election, hoping to change the country from within parliament. And in general, young people up and down the country played a huge part in spreading our message, in cutting TikTok clips from TV debates, and in convincing their families, their parents, their grandparents to go out and vote for change. And vote for change they did. More Thais went out to vote than ever before in history. 70% of them voted for the two core parties that stood against the military government. And the Move Forward party that I ran with defied all expectations in coming first. Things were looking really bright, and I really felt that we were on the brink of a breakthrough. But in the end, I could not have been more wrong. Because despite winning the general election, the undemocratic elements that the military installed in our constitution combined to block us from taking office. The military-appointed senators forced us into opposition, while some parties went back on their pre-electoral promise to form a coalition government with parties tied to the military regime. 2 years on since then, ordinary Thai citizens are still paying the price every day for the subsequent failure in our democratic transition. Many young people, some almost as young as half my age, have been forced into exile or in prison for their involvement with the protests back then. Some academics that I've talked to, both local and foreign, have been threatened or even arrested on serious allegations of sedition or royal defamation. And millions of Thai workers that I met on the campaign trail are now struggling to make ends meet and are losing hope under a political system that is unaccountable and unresponsive to their needs. So the big question here is, why is change so difficult in Thailand, even though the people overwhelmingly voted for one? Well, if the past 2 years in Parliament have taught me anything, it's that most people do see and do understand the need for change. But the reason change has not happened in Thailand is because we have some people who lose out from change and are fighting very hard to protect their interests that go against core democratic values. On the one hand, these people are getting smarter at retaining their grip on power. They know that military coups are no longer in trend, so they've come up with non-military innovations to crack down the opposition without a tank in sight. The Move Forward party that I ran with has now been dissolved by the Constitutional Court. 44 of our MPs and former MPs are at risk of being banned from politics for life for violating the so-called ethical standards simply for submitting a draft bill to Parliament to amend the law on royal defamation. And in this picture of me and my colleagues from the party, taken at one of our biggest rallies leading up to the general election, 5 have already been banned from politics, while 3 are under investigation. Right now in Thailand, the courtroom has replaced the coup as a weapon of choice for anti-democratic forces. Therefore, it's not an exaggeration when I tell you that we are spending each day knowing that there is likely to be an expiry date on our back and working hard each day as if it were our last. But that's not it. Apart from picking off the opposition, the anti-democratic forces in Thailand are also getting smarter at staying in the shadow to prevent taking responsibility. Because while many of them do not run for election themselves, they know that they can simply wait and partner up with opportunistic politicians who are willing to go back on the promises they made to the people in exchange for the offices and the titles to feed their personal ambition, profit, or dynasty. And this symbiotic arrangement is exactly what many people see in government today, with elected politicians willing to be kept on a leash by the puppet masters who lose out from democratic and progressive reforms. The ruling party that campaigned on military reform are now not even willing to disclose officially or be honest with the people on how many military generals there are in Thailand. The ruling party that made ambitious promises to increase our minimum wage and slash our electricity bills are now reluctant to push through measures that may upset the monopolies that are propping up the government. And the ruling party that used to acknowledge and make grand statements about our political prisoners and laws that are suppressing our free speech have now lost the conviction to push through measures in Parliament to resolve these issues. So the question is, how do we, as a country, as a community, lift Thailand out of this pit? Well, the honest answer is, I don't know. If I knew, I probably wouldn't fly all the way here in the hope that some of you may have the key to the answers. But what I do know is that change will happen if we can unite diverse groups of people to converge and together rally for that particular change. And the reason I say this is because despite the little progress that we have seen in Parliament over the past 2 years, there was one significant and notable exception that highlights this point. Last year, the Thai parliament passed a landmark law to legalize same-sex or equal marriage, a very clear example of an outdated law finally catching up with the progressive changes that society has demanded for so long. If you were to ask any Thai person 10 years ago, they would tell you that passing this law is not possible. But the fact that this law ended up getting the support of almost all political parties in parliament last year is not a result of some lucky act of benevolence from those in power, but it's a direct result of the people constantly voicing, explaining, and pushing for this cause. So much so that an issue that was once important for certain groups of people became an issue that was important for all of us as a mark of a progressive and equitable society. So much so that an issue that was once unthinkable in Thailand became undeniable. So, I stand in front of you here today on this stage in Oslo, not to speak on behalf of myself, but to speak on behalf of a movement brewing up in Thailand that is far greater than any one individual. A movement of people that are becoming increasingly frustrated at what they're seeing. A movement of people who believe their country can be better than what it is today. And a movement of people fighting each day to make issues that are unthinkable become undeniable. I'm speaking on behalf of hardworking families up and down the country who always spare their time at every election to convince their neighbors to go out and vote, hoping that what they do at the ballot box will result in better education for their children, better healthcare for their parents. I'm speaking on behalf of my colleagues at the party who right now, in this moment, halfway across the world, are scrutinizing every line item of our annual budget that will be tabled to Parliament later this week to make sure no cases of corruption go undetected or unpunished. And I'm also speaking on behalf of many activists who are fighting from within their own prison cells, sometimes even going on hunger strikes to make sure no one else in Thailand gets thrown into prison simply for their opinions. And what we ask from all of you here in this international community is very simple. Whenever you visit Thailand, just think back to what you heard from me today and try to look behind the smile that is facing you back. If you're a politician visiting our parliament, please don't just be distracted by the size of our unnecessarily large parliament building, but please voice out our laws that still fall short of global human rights standards. If you are a journalist covering a story in Thailand, please don't just write about our rich history and beautiful temples, but please also go and interview our young people who are locked up for their political involvement and are at risk of being forgotten. Or if you're simply a tourist visiting Thailand, please don't spend all your money in our large shopping malls in the center of Bangkok, but please go out and support our local businesses that are struggling against pro-monopoly regulations and a pro-monopoly regime. After 93 years since our supposed transition to a democracy, I believe we are closer than ever to a breakthrough. And together, if we keep pushing bit by bit, the tipping point will come, and what was once unthinkable in Thailand will become undeniable. Thank you very much.